Luigi's Mansion is one of my favorite games of all time. At this point, I've said that line so many times that it might as well be my epitaph, though I'm gonna get pedantic for a second and give a slight correction. Lots of people misquote me as saying Luigi's Mansion is my favorite game of all time, but that is not correct. Pokemon Emerald is my favorite game of all time. Luigi's Mansion is just like top 20 or so. Anyways, Luigi's Mansion is a game I've talked about on this channel too many times before. I made a video about why I hate the sequel, which prompted a video about why I love the original, which then got a remake that I also made a video about, and since then, a third game in the series has seen release, simply titled Luigi's Mansion 3. Lots of people, and for once I actually mean lots of people, have asked me about this game, mostly in the comments of the Dark Moon video. What did I think of the game's reveal? Am I gonna make a video about it? Have I played it yet? What do I think of it? That sort of stuff. Since I am the premier Luigi's Mansion tuber, I was obligated to make a video about this game at some point, and with this video I'm gonna answer your burning questions. Most importantly, is this game good? And the short answer to that question is yes. Luigi's Mansion 3 is good. As for the long answer, well, let's start at the beginning and unpack Luigi's Mansion 3. As we all know by this point, I hate Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon, and because of this, I'd never given much thought to what a third game in the series could be like. With Dark Moon being as unenjoyable as it was to me, why would I want more of it? This is why when Luigi's Mansion 3 was announced, I wasn't thrilled. The game takes clear inspiration from Dark Moon more than it does the original, with next level games again at the helm of the project. It doesn't help that they described this game as comedically spooky, which immediately put my expectations for the game at Dark Moon 2. As time passed, I gained no faith in it. Everything that gave me hope came with an asterisk. The hotel setting was a cool way to get an open explorable world again, but with a random castle, jungle, and pyramid level, it didn't seem like they were actually giving a damn about the setting. The boss ghosts are a step in the right direction, but will it actually fill the portrait ghost void with unique combat scenarios and charming character designs? Or will the bosses be trash like in Dark Moon and the character ghosts totally forgettable? I could go on with other things about the game that didn't impress me, but my expectations were incredibly mixed when the game was approaching release. I was anxious to play it, somewhere right in between excitement and dread. I streamed my entire first playthrough on Twitch. Yes, this is me plugging my Twitch channel, please watch me there, and by the end of my first session, a miracle had happened. I was having fun. Luigi's Mansion 3 made a killer first impression, and the game stayed legitimately good almost through its entire duration. I say almost the entire duration because the game did have its sore spots, but we'll take those as they come. There's a lot of things I want to say about this game, but I didn't want to make this a simple 5 reasons I love Luigi's Mansion 3 video because I want to talk about good and bad, so this is going to be more a rote review for my standards. We're going to do the cooking by the book, as it were, so let's start with the first thing you'll notice when you boot the game up, the graphics. Luigi's Mansion 3 gives off the vibe of a Saturday morning cartoon in its tone, but despite that, the game's graphics and environments are richly detailed. This is legit one of the best looking games on the Switch right now. It really sank into me just how good the game looks when a glitch happened on stream during a cutscene. An enemy bat got stuck and it was still in the shot when a cutscene played out, which showed me that the cutscenes are done in-engine. They aren't pre-rendered. The world always looks this good. The tinge of darkness from the first game is almost entirely gone, but I've come to accept that pining for a more legitimate spookiness in one of these games is a waste of time. Luigi's Mansion 3 is an action exploration game that leans on the side of comedy. There are a few really good gags in this game. That fridge in the kitchen got me good, though moments like that are scant. Though I noticed the game doesn't try too hard to be funny. Instead of quote-unquote gut-busting slapstick, the game primarily tries to be charming and nails it. Luigi isn't constantly being thrown on his face for the laughs, though he does have a string of bad luck, and Luigi's total lack of soul does make for some occasional light chuckles. The opening is the best example of the game's detail and charm. The illusion of the ritzy hotel is full of cute details, some so subtle that I can't believe they even took the time to put them in the game. Like, when you walk up to different characters in this opening, the music changes. Why did they even bother to do that? I didn't even notice it until someone pointed it out on Twitter. That's awesome. Every floor of the hotel even has different kinds of chests to match the aesthetic of the floor, like the film studio has light cases and the gift shop uses cash registers. I love that. The detail isn't just for visual flourishes though. You can interact with most of the game's environments and, even more fun, destroy a lot of it too. The destructible environments are one of the first things I noticed when playing around with the game's new mechanics. It's so much fun to break shit throughout the hotel, especially since you can do so by bashing ghosts against stuff. At one point you even get a fucking buzzsaw to play with, which was one of my favorite set pieces in the entire game. I'm not gonna go on about this for too long because it does take a backseat for the most part, but I feel like the Dark Light is a reductive mechanic for a game with such richly detailed environments. It's used to clever effect in places where you get the feeling that something is missing or are times where you can see invisible objects in a mirror, but a lot of the time it felt tacked on. At the end of every room, I felt obligated to waste time spraying it with the dark light as to not miss something, and I just don't like those kinds of mechanics. If they could drop it for Luigi's Mansion 4, I think the game would be better for it. The interactivity with the environments isn't always about breaking stuff, the game is constantly asking you different questions with its many puzzles. When everything clicks together, this game makes you feel like a genius, which is exactly what a good puzzle game should do. The film studio floor is probably going to be the most popular level in the game, and for good reason. The environment is packed with cute details, it is one of the game's best characters, and the puzzle that ties all the film sets together is brilliant. When I had the aha moment that brought it all together, I was in awe of how cool it was. The boss of this floor was also fun once I actually figured out how to fight it. This raises the problem of conveyance in a lot of the game's puzzles that we'll talk about later, but as another earlier example of the game's smart puzzle design, the gift shop floor is a satisfying series of simple puzzles and combat encounters, as well as a totally unintrusive tutorial on Luigi's capabilities. When I realized this floor was more or less a tutorial, it was a bit of a shock. Like, oh shit, they pulled a fast one on me, I didn't even realize I was learning. It's so natural, all the pieces of the puzzle slide into place smoothly, and it ends off with a boss fight where you play entirely as Luigi. On the subject of Luigi, he's another element of the game I was afraid of when first going in. I wasn't sure if an emphasis on puzzles meant for co-op, which means lots of switching back and forth, would be fun, or if it would just bring the whole experience down. Thankfully, the game never asks you to go beyond the limits of what one person can do with two controllable characters. It's deliberately paced as to not overwhelm you. There are times where it comes close, but those moments are appropriately later in the game, so the challenge is warranted. With two playable characters comes the co-op, and with a game mostly built around it, it's a lot of fun to play with. Me and my best friend Tyler played about a third of the game together, and it was so much fun putting our heads together for puzzles and teaming up to beat up ghosts. Well, most of the time at least. I guess it's time I talked about the combat. It's okay. There are frequent boss encounters to mix things up, thank God, but in my opinion they don't keep the game's combat from getting a bit stale. Most of the bosses are pretty good, and there's some decent variety, but some of them repeat ideas, and some of them are annoying or straight up confusing. The real problem with the game's combat is the normal enemy encounters. For as many bosses as there are, you'll be spending a lot of your time fighting generic mooks, and when I say generic, I mean really fucking generic. Something about Next Level's designs for generic ghosts always rubs me the wrong way. They feel like toys instead of, you know, ghosts. Anywho, there are 4 basic colored ghosts used ad nauseum, and it makes a lot of the enemy encounters feel samey. Sometimes they'll take advantage of the specific environment you're in, but that's not the case for most of them. Capturing ghosts also doesn't feel as satisfying as it used to, since the classic tug of war isn't your main method of fighting ghosts. Instead, you beat the shit out of them. The slam is a fun idea on paper that quickly dissolves into something a lot more mind-numbing. A lot of the game's combat amounts to waiting for the chance to mash the A button, which actually reminds me a lot of Dark Moon's combat. The game does go further than Dark Moon did, trying to inject strategy into this mechanic by making you keep tabs on higher HP ghosts, the number of ghosts around you, and potential environmental tools to fight ghosts with. These elements help, but slamming the same few ghosts over and over and over again still got a bit boring after a while. I've talked about a few of this game's problems so far amongst the things I've liked, and it's at this point I want to address my biggest problem with the game, that being a frequent lack of proper conveyance. Now, I know everyone is at different skill levels, and not everyone will have trouble with the same things, but I really do feel that the game is marred by a lack of clarity in what it is you're supposed to do or how you're supposed to do it. A few of this game's puzzles are too obtuse for their own good. This game is meant for children, and I still couldn't figure some things out as an adult. And don't get me wrong, I know I can be dumb as a bag of rocks. Some of this was just me being a dipshit, and many solutions did feel obvious in hindsight, but there were a lot of points in the game where I stared at the screen and said, what am I supposed to be doing? The boss fight with the gardener is a really good example of what I'm talking about. At first it seems kinda obvious because the game gives you a buzzsaw, so the solution seems to be cut the plant and drop the gardener's guard and then start sucking, but the plant moves too fast for you to be able to get a hack at its neck, so okay, that doesn't work. Well, there's these gourds here, maybe you have to get the plant stuck on one of the gourds and then cut its neck? Oh, the plant can destroy the gourds. Never mind, what is the solution then? Well, that second thing we came up with was the solution, just not in the way we thought. The plant has 3 different ways of attacking, 2 of which break the gourds, and 1 of which can get stuck on the gourd if you aim it right. I use this as an example of particularly bad conveyance because the game gives you mixed signals here. Despite other things in the room and other things earlier in the floor breaking with the saw, the solution isn't just the saw, and despite the plant's ability to break the gourds, the solution is making it attack one of the gourds. It's not a good boss fight. It legit took me and Tyler 5 minutes of randomly running around before we found the solution on accident. Another later example of this is in the pyramid floor, which was a total mess. If you had me play the pyramid floor at a demo event and asked me my opinion of the game, I would have told you it was terrible. I already hate desert levels to begin with, the sand physics were weirdly inconsistent, there's no reason for there to be a pyramid in this hotel other than, whoa, it's so wacky! That enemy gauntlet with the rising sand was annoying, the boss fight was really annoying, but the worst part is this puzzle right here, the crushing room. Let's set the stage. Some snake statues that shoot lasers pop out of the ground and you have a limited time to deactivate them before you're crushed for an instant game over. Let me ask you this. What do you think the solution is? Do you have any idea by looking at the things at your disposal? I'll go ahead and stop you there. It's the burst. Now, if your first instinct for whatever reason was to use the burst on these statues, why? No, really, what about this puzzle says to you, use an air burst next to the snake statues to deactivate them? Because from my perspective, the only way to find this solution is guesswork in a trial by death. It took me 4 deaths before someone in the chat found the solution by looking it up and told me. I was pissed, and judging by what I've seen, I'm not the only person who got stuck on this. I really don't know what they were thinking with this puzzle. It was one of the only points in the game that made me legitimately angry, and in a floor that already annoyed me. We're going back to positivity now, because I want to bounce off of that to one of my favorite parts of the game. Something that I dreaded going into this game was that this was going to be Luigi's Wacky Adventures featuring ghosts, whoa! I was worried they were going to drop the conceit of a haunted hotel in favor of quirky bullshit. Like a jungle level, or a castle level, or a fucking pyramid. Not for any real reason, but because this game wants to be weird, because weird is fun! And this might sound pretentious of me, and if it does, I'm sorry, but if the game incorporates weirdness for the sake of weirdness, then it ceases to have a cohesive through line and the setting falls apart. Early on in the game, you can see this map that teases what all the floors in the game are, and when I saw the bottom floor, I thought to myself, if that's a fucking lava level in Luigi's mansion, this game is dead to me. Oh my god, thankfully, almost every floor in the hotel is contextualized and has, you know, a reason for being. Most of the floors are things you may expect to find in a high society hotel, or at least you can suspend your disbelief enough that they make sense. The lobby, the guest rooms, the gift shop, the dining hall, the exercise center are all pretty normal. But when the weirder parts of the setting come into play, what's the deal there? Well, the medieval castle isn't really a medieval castle, it's a dinner and a show type of thing, like medieval times or a Renaissance fair. The overgrown plant level is some of the hotel's nicer suites that have been overtaken by a crazy gardener. The pirate level is a bar with a mock beach that happens to have crazy ghosts in it. The variety and set pieces all make sense as functional parts of a fancy resort. And there are exceptions to this. The museum is pushing things, and the pyramid level has literally no explanation for being there, but for almost the entire game, I can believe that this is still one cohesive world, and I think that's awesome. With the amount of floors in this game, it's clearly a much beefier game than the original, though based on how long to beat, it's also not quite as long as Dark Moon. At about 10 hours, Luigi's Mansion 3 still isn't terribly long, but definitely feels beefy and fulfilling without ever overstaying its welcome. It's usually smart about its pacing, breaking up puzzle-heavy floors with some floors that are mostly comprised of a boss fight. I thought it was cool that the game didn't try to drag out places like a concert hall or a dance floor into hour-long exploration segments, giving you a break from puzzles to focus a bit more on combat. Though, honestly, I wouldn't have minded a couple more floors that were focused on puzzles and exploration. About a quarter of the floors in the hotel are basically boss arenas, and I think that's just a hair too many. I would have liked a little more meaty content, and I could have done without some of the fluff. Having to fight Polterkitty twice, and having to explore the boiler room a second time to find a lost toad was pretty obvious padding. Repurposing the environments and making you think about them differently is cool and all, but I can't help but feel like they drag the game down. That floor-by-floor element brings up another thing I was relieved by, the game's structure. While the elevator is a glorified level select menu, the game handles this in a much smoother fashion than Dark Moon did, since you never leave the hotel to go to a mission select. It also makes sense for there to be a level select type of system, since you're in a big hotel with an elevator and multiple floors. The game is clearly linear, sending you up the hotel, but that linearity doesn't take away from the game. It clearly has a direction for you to go in, but it doesn't railroad you. Many floors are open environments for you to explore, with few instances of locked doors or keys. And it's not always sending you up either. Like I mentioned before, you're asked a few times in the game to backtrack. And while that can be a drag and can feel like padding, it helps to sell this hotel as a cohesive world, so I can almost appreciate it. Speaking on that exploration, another thing I can appreciate is how satisfying it is to collect stuff in the game. Now, I didn't 100% this game, and I'm not sure if I really want to, but whenever I decided to hunt for gems or solve a puzzle that netted me a gem, it felt rewarding. Yeah, it's an arbitrary collectible, but it's fun to find, it wasn't required, and it checks off a box on a checklist, and I like doing that. On the flip side, there's the boos. I don't know, I never felt like going back and trying to find them, and fighting them isn't particularly fun. As a side note, I still don't like that boos have become less ethereal and more like rubber toys with wacky tongues. But back to the subject of completion, I've heard that getting 100% isn't worth the hassle, so I didn't feel compelled to do so for the purposes of writing this video, but I may take a crack at it in a replay somewhere down the line. Yes, I said replay, you can bet your ass that I'm gonna be replaying this game in the future. For all its shortcomings, I thoroughly enjoyed my time with Luigi's Mansion 3. It's a country mile better than Dark Moon and way better than I feared it would be, and I'm so thankful that I was able to enjoy another game in this series. As to the inevitable question of whether or not I prefer this to the original game, the answer is simply no, but that's not a bad thing. I'm about to wrap this up, but before I do, I'll leave you with a pretty bold statement on my part. Luigi's Mansion 3 is a dream scenario of not being what I would have hoped for and not being what I expected, but excelling at what it does and becoming the sequel I never knew I wanted. As much as I've brought up the first two games throughout this video, those points of comparison don't even matter because at the end of the day, the game is fun. The original Luigi's Mansion is something very special and very special to me that will probably never happen again, but after seeing what the series can be beyond the original and beyond Dark Moon, I'm okay with that. Don't get me wrong, I'd still be down for a future game having thick atmosphere and more overall subtlety, but if Luigi's Mansion 3 is going to be the framework for the future of the series, then fuck it. Bring on Luigi's Mansion 4. This has been IdeoNoben, and thank you for watching my little video about Luigi's Mansion 3. I mentioned this earlier in the video, and I'm gonna plug it again. I stream on a semi-regular basis on Twitch now, so if you want to come watch me suck at games, there's a link in the description for that. And by the way, when I say thank you for watching, I really mean that. I know that videos about modern games come with a bit of an expiration date, so me not being able to get this video out right when the game released isn't gonna do it any favors. To counter that though, engagement is key. If you liked this video, there's a button for that, and if you want to see more of my videos, there's a less functional button for that too. And definitely share your thoughts on Luigi's Mansion 3 in the comments, whether you loved it, hated it, or don't currently own a Switch because you sat on yours breaking it instantly. If you want to support me by feeding me, you can head to my Patreon, donate as little as $1 a month, and get your name added to the list that's appearing on screen now. That's a nice list. Special thanks to the top patrons, Peyton Lutz and the Silver Keyblade. That longer than usual ending out of the way, thank you all for your support, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Take it easy.